What would you do if you woke from a coma and heard your own son planning to dump your wife in a nursing home the moment you died? How far would you go, not to punish him with violence, but to make sure he never controlled your life, your wife, or your money again? This is how I pretended to sleep, walked out of that hospital, and rewrote our future without saying a single dramatic word to his face. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. My name is Mark, and when I first came back to myself, I did not open my eyes. I remember sound before anything else, like someone turned life back on but forgot to tell my body. There was a steady beeping near my head, a soft hiss of oxygen, distant wheels rolling on linoleum, and a smell that was sharp and chemical, not like any room in my own house. My chest felt heavy but not painful, my mouth dry like I had swallowed dust, and my left hand was numb all the way to my fingertips. I wanted to ask where I was, what had happened, but something inside me said to wait, to listen first and move later. I realized there was a voice close to me, a woman's voice I knew very well. It sounded older and more tired than in my memories, but it still had the same softness. Anna was asking someone how long I had been like this, how much time they thought I had. Her words were slow and careful, the way you speak when every answer might hurt. Then I heard a man answer, a doctor by the tone, explaining that I had been in a coma for weeks, that they were surprised by small signs, that brains sometimes woke up slowly. He said they were watching for changes. He said they would let the family know. I heard a chair scrape and footsteps fade. The door closed. The room felt quieter and heavier. For a while there was only the beep, the hiss, and the small sound of Anna breathing unevenly. I thought about opening my eyes then, but my eyelids felt glued down, and a strange thought crossed my mind. If I kept them shut, people might speak more honestly. People always talk differently around someone they think is asleep or gone. Maybe that thought came from old habits, from years of quiet meetings and reading people before they knew I was reading them. I used to be the calm one in the room, the one who listened first and spoke last, so I stayed still. I let my body lie there, heavy and silent, while my mind sat up and took a chair in the corner to watch. After some time, the door opened again. A familiar male voice came in, cheerful in the way people fake when they are uncomfortable. My son, Daniel, told someone at the door that he would sit with his mother for a bit. Then I heard Julia's lighter, higher voice answer that she would wait outside for a call. Her tone said she did not want to sit in this room longer than necessary. The door closed, and her footsteps moved away. The chair beside my bed creaked again, and Daniel let out a sigh he probably thought no one heard. He asked Anna how she was holding up. She said she was fine, but her voice shook like thin glass. He made a small sound, something between pity and impatience, and told her that they had to be realistic. He told her the doctors had said the chances were not high. He told her that even if I woke up, I would not be the same. He said a lot of people never really came back from this kind of thing. I lay there, listening to my own son talk about me like I was already a shadow on the wall. He went on, saying that they had to think about money and care, about what would happen if I stayed like this for months, maybe years. He said he had his own family, responsibilities, a daughter who would need school and activities. I heard Anna whisper something about managing, about pensions and savings, about doing it together. He answered in a careful tone, the one he used when he wanted to sound reasonable while pushing something he had already decided. He told her that my pension and the house were not endless resources, that the hospital bills would keep coming, that her health was not good either. Then he said the line that froze everything inside me. He told her that when I finally went, they would have to move her into a nursing home because there was no way they could take full-time care of her. He added that it would be better to start planning early. He said it like he was talking about rearranging furniture. My wife asked him what he meant exactly, and there was a small silence. He said that the house could be sold, that the money could cover a decent facility, that it would be safer for her anyway. He did not say that he did not want her in his own home, but every word carried that message. I lay perfectly still, but my heartbeat picked up, and the monitor tattled on me with faster beeps. Anna noticed and asked if something was wrong. He told her not to worry, that I was probably just reacting to something medical. Then he lowered his voice and told her that this was exactly why decisions had to be made, because this situation was unstable. He said he was already looking at options. He said he had spoken with someone about power of attorney and long-term care planning. The words hit me like cold water. He had spoken to someone about legal control, as if I were a broken machine and my wife a package that needed storage. He called me an expensive burden in a low voice, saying he did not mean it in a bad way, just in a practical one. He said that life had to go on, That sentence stayed in my mind like a nail. Life had to go on. For who, I wondered? For him, not for us. There was a pause, then the chair moved again. I felt a light touch on my arm. Anna stroked it and told me very gently that she loved me and that she hoped I could hear her. She said she did not want to be anywhere I was not. Her voice cracked on that sentence. Daniel told her she was being emotional and that in the long run she would see it was better. He said she would make new friends, have professional care, less strain on everyone. He meant less strain on him. I listened and felt something inside me shift, not explode. It was not anger in the way people imagine it. It was more like a straight line being drawn where before everything had been blurry. I understood, without drama, that my own son did not see a father in that bed. He saw a cost and an obstacle. He did not see a wife sitting beside me. He saw another problem to move out of sight. I stayed still because I wanted to hear everything. After what felt like a long time, Daniel's phone buzzed, and he told Anna he had to take a work call. He told her to rest, promised to return later, and left the room. The door closed behind him. The silence that followed felt heavy, but also strangely clean. Anna squeezed my hand and told me she would go home to shower and come back in the evening. She kissed my forehead. I wanted to squeeze back harder, to open my eyes, but I forced myself to stay in that quiet darkness a bit longer. I needed more information before saying a single word to anyone. When she left, the room grew empty except for machines and the hum of air conditioning. After a while, I heard soft shoes approach and stop by my bed. A woman's voice, gentle and low, asked if I was still in there. It was the nurse, the one who had been moving around my bed at night. She adjusted something on the stand and then leaned closer. I could feel her breath on my cheek. She said she had noticed my heart rate during the earlier conversation, that she knew some people in comas could hear more than others thought. She said she did not know exactly what I had understood, but she wanted me to know that the doctor had written that my brain activity looked promising. I let my fingers move, just a little. Her hand found mine, and I closed my grip around her fingers. She sucked in a small breath and whispered that she knew I was still here. She promised she would tell the doctor that I was responding, but she also whispered that we could talk again later when the room was empty. I loosened my grip to show I had heard. She stepped back, and I heard her straighten the sheets and check the monitor. Then I heard the pen scratch on the chart at the foot of the bed. A few minutes later, the door opened again, and the doctor came in, his steps firm and professional. He spoke in a normal tone, explaining to someone that he believed I had regained some level of consciousness. He said they would reassess my capacity in the next days and that no legal decisions should be rushed. I understood who he was talking to without hearing my son's name. He did not answer directly, only said something about being busy and needing clarity soon. The doctor repeated calmly that my mental state looked better than expected and that I had to be treated as capable until proven otherwise. The conversation moved to the hallway, voices fading into the buzz of hospital noise. Inside my own head, things were suddenly very still. I knew two things clearly. First, my son had already placed me in the column of almost gone. Second, at least one person in this building was ready to say I was still here. My heart slowed again, and the beeping softened. I lay there, eyes closed, waiting for the next chance to move on my own terms. Later that evening, when the corridor grew quiet and the lights dimmed, I heard soft footsteps again and the rustle of paper. The nurse's voice whispered near my ear that she had left something small on the bedside table and that we would talk properly when the room was truly empty. Then the monitor settled into a calm, steady rhythm that matched the decision forming slowly in my mind. I lay there with my eyes closed and let my mind walk backward, away from the machines and the smell of antiseptic, back to a time when Daniel was small and everything seemed simple. I remembered a kitchen filled with the sound of little feet, a boy in socks sliding on the tiles while Anna laughed and told him to slow down. Back then, he would run to me when I came home from a construction site or a meeting, waving school drawings in my face, demanding that I see every crooked line as a masterpiece. I had long days as a civil engineer, often out on dusty sites in bad weather, but I always tried to bring that quiet part of myself home. I did not shout much, did not make big speeches. I just fixed things, paid bills on time, showed up to school events, and tried to be a solid wall Daniel could lean on. Money was never endless, but we managed. Anna stayed home when Daniel was young, cooking simple meals, stretching every paycheck, patching clothes instead of throwing them out. When Daniel talked about his future, even as a teenager, he always said he wanted something different, something flashy. He said he did not want to work with his hands. He wanted offices, suits, shining buildings, not the inside of them like me, but the top floors. I remember one evening in the garage, the smell of oil and cut wood in the air, when we worked on his first second-hand car. The hood was open, and my hands were black with grease while he stood with a flashlight, bored and impatient. I tried to explain how engines worked, how patience and steady hands mattered more than speed. He nodded, but he also said that in the future he would pay someone else to do this kind of thing. He said the real goal was to be the one who signed checks, not the one who turned bolts. Back then, his words felt like normal teenage arrogance. I thought he would grow out of it. I did not see that it was the beginning of a pattern where work done quietly had less value in his eyes than work done with visible status. Years passed. He went to university with my support. We did not take vacations, did not change the car, delayed fixing the roof of the house for 2 years because tuition had to be paid, rent had to be sent. I remember sitting at the old wooden table in our small living room with bank statements and a worn calculator while Anna massaged my shoulders. She told me we would manage, that he would have a better life because of this. I believed her. When Daniel finished his degree and got his first job in finance, he came home wearing suits and a new kind of attitude. He hugged us, yes, thanked us in quick words. But he also started to talk about how the world really worked now. He said things like numbers did not lie, like efficiency was everything, like feelings could not pay bills. At first, it was almost amusing, listening to our own son explain basic budgeting to the man who had juggled 3 loans at once just to keep him in school. Over time, though, those little lectures changed. They started to sound less like sharing and more like talking down. I noticed it most when he brought Julia into our lives. She was polite at first, fashionable, always checking her phone, always looking for better lighting for photos. She talked a lot about lifestyle and balance, and how elders in some places lived in wonderful facilities with pools and activities. She said old houses were charming, but impractical. She said families were too sentimental about property instead of thinking about what she called long-term efficiency. I remember one dinner at Daniel and Julia's place, their big suburban kitchen with white counters and a shiny island. Lena was still a toddler, playing with plastic blocks on the floor. Julia had poured wine for everyone and started talking about their friend whose parents had moved into a care community. She described how beautiful it was, how clean, how modern. She said this friend could finally live her own life again because she did not have to worry about daily care. She added in a light tone that she hoped their generation would avoid the trap of sacrificing all their best years to older relatives who refused to accept reality. She said it casually, but her eyes had flicked toward Anna. I pretended not to notice, but the seed landed somewhere deep. Over the years, there were other small moments. Times when I asked Daniel to help carry something heavy, and he sighed before moving, as if I had interrupted something much more important. Times when he told me in front of others that I did not understand how complicated modern finances were. Times when he called our neighborhood outdated and suggested we could sell the house and move to a smaller place near a clinic, purely for convenience, he said. I always brushed it away, thinking he was just busy and stressed, that he would remember everything we had done for him when it truly mattered. I did not want to believe my own son could see us as anything but his parents. The memory of one evening was especially clear as I lay in that hospital bed. We sat in our own living room, the wallpaper a bit faded, the carpet worn, but the room still warm with the smell of Anna's cooking. Daniel had come over with some printed papers and a laptop. He told us that he wanted to discuss future planning, that it was smart to think ahead. He used words like estate, assets, protection, and said he had spoken with a colleague who specialized in such things. He insisted that we should consider giving him power of attorney in case something happened. He said it would be easier for everyone. He said he could handle things more smoothly if paperwork was already in place. Anna looked uncertain. I remember feeling a small alarm ring inside my chest, but I ignored it. I told him we did not need to rush anything, that we would think about it. Later, when he left, I put the papers in a drawer in my garage workshop under a stack of old project folders. Something about the way he had looked at our house while he talked about selling made me uncomfortable. Now, listening to the memory of his voice in the ICU, telling Anna that I was an expensive burden and that she would go to a nursing home, those earlier conversations lined up like a neat, unpleasant row of stepping stones leading to this moment. He had not changed overnight. He had been moving in this direction for a long time. I also thought about all the small sacrifices Anna and I had made. The vacations we never took, the nights I stayed up late adjusting plans for his tuition instead of resting, the time I turned down a promotion that would have moved us to another city because he begged to stay near his school and friends. None of that lived in his tone now. In his mind, we were weights on his ankles as he tried to climb higher. The realization did not make me cry. It made me feel something harder and simpler, like a beam placed across a foundation. I saw my life as a series of quiet choices. Stay married when things were hard, pay bills on time, keep promises, fix what was broken instead of throwing it away. I had always thought those choices would be seen as strength. Now I understood that Daniel had mistaken my quiet for weakness. He had never truly learned the difference. Footsteps in the corridor pulled me back to the present. The door opened, and I heard Dr. Hayes come in with a lighter tread than Daniel's heavy, impatient walk. Papers rustled as he checked something at the foot of the bed. He spoke to another staff member in a low voice, saying that my responses were improving, that there were signs of clear consciousness. He mentioned that any decisions about guardianship or long-term care needed to involve me directly. He said it was medically and ethically necessary. The other person asked if that meant delaying certain arrangements my son had asked about. The doctor answered firmly that nothing could be signed or finalized until my mental capacity was properly evaluated. There was a pause, then the other footsteps left the room. I felt the doctor come closer. He leaned in and told me he knew I could hear more than people thought, and that he would come back later to speak when my son was not present. Then I heard his pen move across the chart and the soft click of the door as he stepped out, leaving me with the steady beep of the monitor and a growing sense that I was not as powerless as my son believed. The next morning, light pressed against my closed eyelids in a softer way. The beeping was calmer, my heartbeat steady. I decided it was time to open my eyes, not wide and dramatic, just enough to see. My eyelids lifted slowly, and the world came into focus in dull colors. The ceiling was white with small cracks. The monitor stood to my left, numbers glowing. My right arm had a line attached to a bag of clear fluid. I turned my head a little and saw Nurse Carla at the end of the bed, checking the chart. She noticed and came closer, her eyes kind but sharp. She told me I had given everyone a scare, but that I was doing better now. She asked if I understood where I was. My voice came out rough and thin, but I managed to tell her the basics. I said my name. I guessed I was in the hospital. I said I remembered driving one day, and then nothing. She nodded and told me I had been in a coma after a stroke, that I was making good progress, that they would test my mind more over the next days. Then she lowered her voice and asked if I remembered anyone visiting me. I let my eyes rest on hers for a long second and said that I remembered Anna, and I remembered Daniel talking about plans. She looked at me carefully, then asked if I wanted to talk about that now or later. I told her later. I needed my strength first. Inside, though, I had already decided something. Pretending to be asleep had served its purpose. Now I had to act awake and still keep listening. A few hours later, Dr. Hayes came in with a small team. They asked questions, simple at first, then more complex. They asked the date, my age, the name of the city. They showed me objects and asked me to remember them. My brain felt slow but steady, like an old machine that still ran if you did not push it too hard. When they were done, the doctor told me, in that careful tone professionals use, that my cognition looked strong. He said there might be some slowdowns, but nothing that made me unable to make decisions. He said they would record that in my file. I felt a quiet relief that was almost physical. Somewhere on paper now, in an official hand, there would be proof that I was not just a body to be moved around. Later that day, Daniel arrived. I saw him come in wearing a crisp shirt and holding his phone like an extra piece of his hand. He smiled in a way that looked practiced and told me it was good to see me awake. He spoke slowly, like I might not understand normal speed. I thanked him for visiting, keeping my tone calm and flat, as if this were any other day. He started asking how I felt, if I was confused, if I remembered everything. I answered honestly, but without drama. I told him I was tired, but clear. Then he shifted. His voice became more serious, more like his work voice. He told me that he and Julia had been under a lot of stress while I was in the coma, that decisions had to be made quickly, that hospitals were expensive. He said this as if he were the one who had almost died. I listened. He mentioned in a casual way that he had been talking with someone about power of attorney and long-term planning for me and Anna. He said it was only to protect us, to make sure things went smoothly. He used the word burden again, softer this time, saying that he did not want me to worry about being one. I heard what he really meant. He did not want to carry me. I asked him, in a quiet voice, if he had already signed anything or arranged anything legal on my behalf. He hesitated for half a heartbeat, then said that he was only gathering information, nothing final. He added that it would be easier if I just trusted him. That paperwork confused people in my state. I let the insult hang between us without reacting. I told him I appreciated his concern, but that I wanted to look at any documents myself. I said I would also speak to someone I trusted about these matters. His jaw tightened. He told me that I should focus on recovery and leave the complicated parts to him. He said he was only trying to help. I nodded and said that I heard him and that I would still be speaking to my own advisor. I watched his eyes as I said that. For the first time, I saw a flash of irritation that did not fit the role of the caring son. It was the look of someone whose plan had hit an unexpected wall. After he left, Nurse Carla came in again. She asked in a low voice if I wanted her to confirm anything I had heard earlier, during the coma. I told her that I remembered Daniel talking about selling the house and putting Anna in a nursing home after I was gone. I told her I remembered him talking about my care as a cost, not as a duty. She looked sad, but not surprised. She said she could not take sides, but she could make sure the doctor's notes about my mental state were precise and strong. She said that would make it harder for anyone to claim I did not understand what I was doing. I thanked her. It was a simple thing, ink on paper, but it felt like the first brick placed in a wall between us and Daniel's plans. When evening came, the doctor returned and spoke with me alone for a few minutes. He told me that my son had asked more than once about legal authority to make decisions. He said he had told him to wait, that there was no medical basis for taking control away from me at this point. Then he asked if I had someone I trusted for legal matters. I said I did. I gave him Victor's name and asked if it would be possible to make a call from the room in private. He said they could arrange that, as long as I was strong enough to talk. A nurse brought the phone closer and adjusted the bed so I could sit up. My hands shook a little as I dialed the number from memory. It had been years since I had called Victor, but his voice sounded exactly the same when he answered, calm and dry and slightly amused. I told him where I was and that I had had a stroke. His tone changed, became more serious, but he did not waste time with empty comfort. He asked clear questions. Was I mentally clear? Was there pressure from family? Did I still have the same house, the same pension? I answered each one as best I could. I told him I had heard Daniel talk about selling the house, about putting Anna in a facility after I died, about taking power of attorney. I told him I had not signed anything. He stayed quiet for a moment, then said that was good. He told me he would look up whatever he could, check if any documents had been filed in my name. He said the most important thing, for now, was that I did not sign or verbally agree to any legal changes, no matter how harmless they sounded. He said he would come by the hospital after visiting ours in a few days, and that if anyone asked, he was an old friend. When I hung up, I felt more tired than I had in days, but also more grounded. I had reached out to someone who saw me as a person, not a spreadsheet cell. I lay back and closed my eyes, letting the sound of the monitor wash over me. Time passed in small pieces after that. Tests, visits, quiet nights. Daniel came by and tried again to steer conversations toward paperwork. Each time I smiled and told him we could talk later, after I had spoken to my own advisor. I watched his patience thin like worn fabric. One afternoon, as I dozed, I heard voices at the nurse's station outside. Daniel was talking to someone, his tone low but insistent. He mentioned my name, Anna's name, words like forms and signatures and timelines. My heart ticked faster for a moment. I kept my eyes closed. A little later, the door opened and closed quickly. I heard no one speak in the room. Instead, through my half-open lids, I saw a small movement at the edge of my vision. A slim folder with our names printed on a label lay on the counter by the door. Nurse Carla stepped in, picked it up, and turned it in her hands. Her eyes flicked toward my bed. She paused, then slid the folder into a drawer at the nurse's station outside and shut it gently. When she came back in and checked the monitor, our eyes met for a second. There was no speech, just a quiet understanding that something important had been delayed, maybe even blocked, and that my window to act was still open. A week later, they told me I was strong enough to leave the hospital. The day felt unreal, like someone had switched films halfway through a movie. Nurse Carla helped me dress, slow and careful, in clothes Anna had brought from home. My legs were shaky, but they held. As she adjusted my sleeve, she leaned in and reminded me quietly not to sign anything I did not fully understand. She said Dr. Hayes had written a clear note that I was mentally competent, and that any legal paperwork needed my direct approval. I thanked her. There was not much more I could say. Outside the hospital doors, the air felt cooler and cleaner than inside. Anna waited by the curb, eyes wet, hands trembling as she held onto a small bag and the handle of the old car. When she saw me, she smiled in a way that made the whole world blur for a moment. She hugged me gently, afraid to hurt me. I told her I was fine, that just standing there with her was already more than I had expected to get back. Daniel stood a few steps away, checking his watch, car keys in his hand. He said he would drive. His tone was brisk, like this was a busy day at the office and we were an errand on his list. On the drive home, he talked a lot about logistics. He said we needed to think about home care, equipment, schedules. He said he was already researching rehabilitation centers. He used the word resources several times, as if my life were a project with a budget. I watched the buildings slide past the car window and listened. I did not mention Victor. I did not mention that I already had my own idea of what rehabilitation might look like. When we pulled into the driveway of our house, I saw it with new eyes. The paint was peeling in spots, the steps were slightly worn, the yard a little wild. To me, it was history and work and memory. To Daniel, I knew it was a listing on a real estate site waiting for a price tag. Inside, everything smelled like home. Anna had tried to keep it clean, but I could see where dust had settled, where her strength had failed her in small ways. She rushed ahead to straighten cushions while Daniel carried in a box of medical supplies he had picked up from the pharmacy. He explained how some of them worked, as if I could not read the labels myself. I nodded, grateful for the practical help, even as I heard the edge of control in his voice. That evening, when Daniel left to pick up Lena from an activity, I sat with Anna in the living room. She took my hand and asked, in a soft voice, if I had really heard what Daniel had said in the hospital. I told her yes. I repeated his words about the nursing home, about selling the house, about my care being an expensive burden. Tears filled her eyes. She asked if I thought he meant it, if he truly saw us that way. I did not rush to answer. I told her I thought Daniel believed he was being practical. I said that practicality without love can become cruelty, even if the person using it does not see it that way. I said we needed to be careful now, not hysterical, not dramatic, just careful. I told her I had called Victor. At the sound of his name, some of the fear in her face shifted to relief. She remembered him from years ago, when he had helped us with a small dispute over a neighbor's fence. She knew he was calm and steady. I told her he would come by as a friend and that we should not tell Daniel about the visit. She nodded slowly. For the first time since waking up, I saw a light of decision in her eyes, not just fear. 2 days later, Victor arrived in the late afternoon, carrying a paper bag with bakery bread to make his visit look casual. Daniel was at work. The house was quiet except for the ticking of the hallway clock. Victor hugged Anna gently and shook my hand with both of his, studying my face as if he were reading a familiar blueprint. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I had once spread out bank statements and plans for Daniel's tuition. The bread sat untouched between us. I told Victor everything, slowly and in order. I told him about the COMA, the overheard conversation, the words about burdens and facilities, the mention of power of attorney, the folder at the nurse's station. He listened without interrupting, only asking specific questions when something needed clarity. When I finished, he leaned back, folded his hands, and spoke in his usual slow, dry tone. He said the good news was that legally, nothing serious seemed to have been done yet. He said the note from Dr. Hayes about my mental competence was important and that he wanted a copy. He said the house deed was still in my name alone, as far as he knew, and that my pension and savings were under my direct control. He asked about any earlier documents Daniel might have tried to get us to sign. I went to the garage and brought back the drawer contents, a stack of old folders and the set of papers Daniel had once pushed across this very table. Victor flipped through them carefully. He pointed out that none of them had my signature. He nodded, satisfied. Then he started asking different questions. Did we have any connections abroad? Old colleagues, distant family, places where we would not be completely alone. He asked how we would feel about living somewhere smaller, somewhere quieter, even in another country if needed. I realized then that he saw the situation the way I had started to see it in the hospital, not as a fight inside these walls, but as a slow exit strategy. He did not push, though. He just opened the door to the idea and let the air from that possibility drift into the room. Anna listened with her hands folded. She asked about practical things, medical care, visas, language. Victor answered in general terms, saying he knew people who had moved for health reasons, that there were ways to arrange care abroad if finances were handled properly. He did not mention any specific country, but his questions told me he already had a few in mind. After he left, promising to send us some neutral information to read for our general education, I sat alone at the table for a while. The house around me felt suddenly more fragile, like a shell that could be cracked by a single signature if placed in the wrong hands. The next week became a quiet series of preparations that did not look like preparations. Daniel came by with printouts of clinics and care centers. I thanked him, took them, and put them in a neat pile on the sideboard. I told him we would think about all options, including some that might be closer to specialists, maybe even abroad. He raised an eyebrow at that but said nothing. I saw his eyes move to the corners of the room, to the cracks in the paint, to the old furniture. To him, the house was already more asset than home. When he left, I called Victor from the privacy of the garage and gave him answers to questions he had asked earlier. How much was left on the mortgage? What were my monthly pension payments? What savings accounts existed in my name alone? I did not send him any documents yet. I only confirmed what he had found in his own checks. Later, he called and said that if we chose to leave, we could do it with enough to live modestly but safely. He spoke of steps in broad terms, never naming specific forms. He said those details could wait until we were absolutely sure. A few days after that, he suggested we meet at a small bank branch instead of at home. Anna and I went together. In a quiet room at the back, a young employee with nervous eyes closed the door and sat with us. Victor joined by phone. We talked about simple things on the surface, like consolidating accounts and reducing risk. I followed the explanations carefully. I asked my own questions. The bank employee looked surprised that I was so clear, as if he had expected someone in my condition to just nod at whatever was put in front of him. I did not sign anything that day. We agreed that statements would be sent to my personal email, that nothing would be changed without my direct confirmation. Victor said it was enough for now. We would not rush. At home that evening, Daniel called, sounding irritated. He asked why I had gone to the bank without telling him. He said he could have helped, that this was exactly the kind of thing he understood better than we did. I told him I wanted to handle some matters myself, that it helped my recovery to manage my own affairs. He was silent for a moment, then told me that secrecy was not healthy, that families needed transparency. I almost laughed at that word, but I kept my voice calm. I said I agreed, and that was why I was telling him now that I would be making my own decisions. The true shift came a week later. Victor called and said that if we wanted to move, it had to be soon, before any more pressure built from Daniel's side. He mentioned a contact who could help us find a small apartment in a quiet town in another country where my medical needs could still be met. He said we did not need to commit forever, only long enough to be safe. That night, Anna and I sat on the couch holding hands in silence. Leaving meant losing daily contact with Lena. It meant admitting that our son was not the person we had hoped he would become. It meant stepping away from everything familiar. But staying, we both knew, meant slowly handing our future to someone who saw us as a problem to solve. In the end, the choice was clear, even if it hurt. A few days after that, we stood again at an airport, this time with 2 modest suitcases and a folder of medical papers in Anna's bag. The loudspeaker called our flight in a language we barely understood. My phone vibrated in my pocket. Daniel's name flashed on the screen, followed by a new message asking where we were, why the house alarm app showed no movement, why we had missed a meeting with a care coordinator he had arranged. I looked at the words, then pressed the power button until the screen went black. I took Anna's hand and walked toward the gate as the boarding announcement echoed through the terminal and the world behind us began to shrink. The town we moved to was small and quiet, the kind of place where the loudest sound in the morning was a bus passing on the main road and the clink of cups in a nearby cafe. When we stepped out of the airport taxi in front of the little apartment building, I felt both very old and strangely new at the same time. The air smelled different, a mix of sea salt and exhaust, and the words on the signs meant nothing to me yet. Anna stood beside me with her hand on the handle of a small suitcase, her shoulders straight even though I could feel her trembling through her fingers when I held them. We climbed the narrow stairs slowly. The landlord, a short man with kind eyes and broken English, showed us the door and pointed out where the nearest shop was, where the clinic was, how to reset the heater. I thanked him again and again. Inside, the apartment was simple. 1 small bedroom, a narrow kitchen, a table with 2 chairs, a sofa that had seen better days. The windows looked out over a little street with laundry hanging from balconies and a bakery on the corner. It was a world away from our old house, but it was ours in a way that felt cleaner. There were no old debts in the walls here, no expectations, no past arguments. Just 4 rooms and time. The first days were filled with small tasks that took all our energy. We found the grocery store and learned which milk did not taste strange. We found the closest clinic and met a young doctor who spoke enough English to explain that my recovery looked steady and that Anna would get regular checkups too. We learned how the buses worked, how to read enough of the language to spot words like pharmacy and bank. Every night, we collapsed into bed early, exhausted not just from walking and climbing stairs, but from thinking so hard about every little thing. Even so, when I woke up in the dark and listened to the sound of Anna breathing beside me, I felt something I had not felt in a long time. I felt safe. Not because nothing could go wrong, but because for the first time in months, our future was not being quietly planned by someone who saw us as obstacles. After a week, once we had basic routines in place, I went to the small cafe near the apartment. It became my corner office. The owner quickly learned that I liked my coffee weak and my bread plain. He did not ask many questions. I sat by the window with my phone and an old notebook and started to shape the confusion in my head into lists. I wrote down what we had, pension amounts, savings, the rough estimate from Victor about what was left from the house after everything. I wrote down what we needed: rent, medication, food, transport. It was not elegant work, but it was the kind of quiet planning I knew how to do. Each number I wrote made me feel a little less like a patient and a little more like the man I had been before the stroke. In the afternoons, when Anna rested, I used the cafe's Wi-Fi to exchange emails with Victor. He had set up a secure way for us to talk. His messages were as measured as his voice. He asked for copies of some documents, which I scanned at a tiny shop near the bus stop. He explained things in plain language, stripping away the heavy legal terms as much as he could. He did not flood me with details. He gave me the shape of the structure we were building, not every nail and screw. The main idea was simple. We would place what we had into a framework where only Anna and I could decide how it was used while we lived. There would be clear rules about what happened after we were gone. Daniel would not have control, no matter how he argued. At the same time, Lena would not be punished for her parents' choices. There would be something set aside for her education, handled in a way that did not flow through Daniel's hands. Reading those lines on my phone screen in that noisy foreign cafe, I felt something loosen in my chest. For months, my life had been a story other people were trying to write for me. Now, slowly, I was taking back the pen. I did not tell Anna every technical detail, not because I wanted to hide anything from her, but because I knew too much information would only make her anxious. Instead, I told her the core truths. That we would not be forced into any place we did not want to live, that no one could sell our future out from under us, that our granddaughter would have a path to study and build her own life one day, even if her parents never changed. Each time I said these things, I saw some of the tightness in her shoulders ease. Life took on a simple rhythm. Mornings at the clinic or in the small local park, sitting on a bench while old men argued in a language I did not yet understand. Afternoons at the cafe with my notebook and my phone, evenings cooking with Anna in the narrow kitchen, laughing quietly when we burned something because the stove knobs were all different. At night sometimes we sat at the table with old photos spread out. We had brought only a small envelope of them, but each picture held an entire world. There was Daniel at 5, holding a toy truck, Daniel at 10, with a missing front tooth, Daniel at 20, in a cheap suit with his graduation cap in his hand. We did not speak much when we looked at those pictures. We did not have to. Our silence did the talking. Of course, our new life did not erase him. He was still there, in our phones and in our minds. At first, his messages were angry. He demanded to know where we were, why we had left without telling him, why the house was dark on the day he had arranged a meeting with a care coordinator. He said we were being irrational, ungrateful, unfair. He reminded us how much time he had spent handling things while I was in the hospital. I read every message and answered only when necessary. I told him we had moved temporarily for my recovery. I told him we were safe. I did not share the address, the town name, or the details of our plans. He pushed, asking about the house, about the accounts, about the documents he had left at the nurse's station. I said only that our affairs were in order, and that I was handling them. He wrote that he hoped I was not making foolish choices. He wrote that old age and illness could cloud judgment. He wrote that he was only trying to protect us. I did not argue. I had learned long ago that some people confuse arguing with caring, but caring does not need to shout. I simply stopped replying whenever the messages turned into lectures. Weeks passed. My body felt stronger and my mind clearer. I could walk longer, climb the stairs without holding the rail so tightly. Anna found a small group of women at the market who spoke a little English and shared recipes with her. She began to smile more, to talk about simple things like what flowers grew in the nearby park. In those small, ordinary details, we built a life. At the same time, the other life, the legal one, moved quietly forward in the background. Victor scheduled video calls at odd hours because of the time difference. Sometimes we spoke from the cafe, sometimes from the corner of our little living room. He would ask us to confirm that we understood the main points. He said that certain decisions, once signed, would be hard to undo, so we had to be sure. We were sure. At one point, he raised the most painful question. What role, if any, did we want Daniel to have in anything related to our care in the future? He said we could leave some narrow space for him if we believed he might change, or we could close that door completely. Anna and I sat with that question for days. We did not answer on the call. We walked the small streets, we sat on the park bench, we cooked soup in our tiny kitchen. We remembered the boy who had run in socks on our kitchen floor, and we remembered the man who had stood by my hospital bed and talked about burden and facilities while thinking I could not hear. In the end, we chose a middle path. We made sure he could not decide where we lived, what care we received, or how our remaining money was used. That power would sit with us while we lived, and then with a person Victor trusted, not someone in our bloodline. At the same time, we did not erase him completely. We allowed for a simple, fixed gift to him after both of us were gone, something that could not be used to control us while we were alive and that did not match the size of what he had expected. It was a boundary, not revenge. The larger part, the careful heart of the structure, went toward Anna's security and Lena's future. Signing the last set of papers in the small office of a local notary was an oddly quiet moment. There were no speeches, no dramatic music, only the sound of pages turning and a pen scratching on paper. The notary read out the parts that needed to be read, in halting English with Victor present on the screen of a tablet. I asked questions when I did not understand something. I made sure that every phrase about control and decision-making was clear in my simple words before I agreed. When it was done, the notary stamped the pages with a heavy seal that made a deep sound on the desk, like a judge's gavel in a small, bright room. Anna squeezed my knee under the table. On the walk home, the town looked the same as always. The laundry still hung from balconies. The bakery still smelled of fresh bread. Cars still rolled past with their horns occasionally flaring. Yet for me, the air felt different. It was as if a pressure I had been carrying since the ICU, since that first moment of overhearing my son's plans, had finally been placed down on the ground and left there. We did not speak much that evening. We made tea, we ate bread and cheese, we watched the sunset from the living room window. When the sky turned dark, I checked my phone, half expecting more messages from Daniel. For once, there were none. Instead, there was a short email from Victor. He confirmed that everything had been filed, both in our new location and back in our home country. He wrote that from this point on, no decision about us, our care, or our assets could be made without our own consent or without following the instructions we had just signed. He did not go into detail about what that might mean for Daniel later. He simply said that the structure was strong and that we should now live, not plan. I read the email twice, then passed the phone to Anna. She read it slowly, moving her lips along each line. When she finished, she put the phone down, closed her eyes, and let out a long breath that sounded almost like a sob and almost like a laugh. The next days felt lighter. I found myself able to enjoy small things again. The way the sunlight moved across the kitchen floor, the smell of coffee in the morning, the way Anna's eyes softened whenever she looked out toward the distant sea. We still missed Lena. That ache did not go away. Sometimes Anna would see a little girl on the street and fall silent. Sometimes I would open the photo folder on my phone and stare at Lena's smile until my eyes burned. But now, when we thought about the future, it was not as a blurry wall controlled by our son. It was as a path we had shaped with our own hands, even if it was shorter than we had hoped. One afternoon, while I was at the cafe, a message popped up from Daniel after a long pause. His tone was different this time, less sharp, more measured. He wrote that he missed us, that Lena kept asking when we would visit, that Julia thought our move had been impulsive. He said he wanted to schedule a video call so we could clear the air and talk about how things would work from now on. He mentioned that he had spoken to someone about our estate and that there were questions that needed answers. I stared at the screen for a long time. I knew that behind the softer words, the same need for control still moved, but I also knew that now the ground beneath us had changed. The foundation was no longer his. It was ours. That evening, back in the apartment, Anna and I sat at the table while I read the message out loud. We discussed it slowly, step by step, like we used to discuss big bills and school forms. We agreed that we would talk, but that we would not walk into that conversation alone. I wrote back saying that a call was possible and that I would ask Victor to be present as well to help explain the situation. I kept the language simple and polite. Before I went to bed, I checked my email one last time. There was a new message from Victor. The subject line was short and clear. It was an invitation to a video meeting labeled as a family update about estate and care planning. The invite listed 4 names besides his, mine, Anna's, Daniel's, and Julia's. The time was set for the following week. I clicked accept and watched as the small check mark appeared next to my name on the screen, like a calm hand being raised in a room I had chosen to enter on my own terms. The day of the call came with a gray sky and a light wind that rattled the window of our little apartment. I woke earlier than usual, not because of pain, but because my mind would not settle. Anna moved quietly in the kitchen, making tea. She placed the cup in front of me at the table and asked if I was sure about everything. I told her that the documents were already signed, that nothing in this call would change the legal reality. I said the only thing left was to say out loud what we had already done in silence. She nodded, but her hands trembled a little when she wrapped them around her own cup. We did not want to take the call in the apartment, so we walked to a small office building near the town center where the local lawyer we had used for the notary work had lent us a room. The hallway smelled of paper and cleaning fluid. The room itself was plain, with a rectangular table, 4 chairs, and a window that looked out onto a side street. A computer sat in the middle of the table, already set up for the video conference. The lawyer greeted us briefly, checked that the connection worked, and then left, closing the door gently behind him. For a moment, it was just the 2 of us and the quiet hum of the computer. I placed my notebook beside the keyboard, not because I expected to write anything, but because it felt like bringing a familiar tool to an unfamiliar place. Anna sat to my left, close enough that our shoulders touched. When the time for the meeting arrived, I clicked on the link in the email. The screen flickered, then divided into 3 boxes. In one box, I saw Victor in his office, shelves of files behind him, glasses low on his nose, expression calm. In another box, I saw Daniel and Julia at their dining table. Their room was bright and large, with tasteful art on the walls and a bowl of fruit centered between them and the camera. Lena sat at the far end of the table, swinging her legs and looking at the screen with wide eyes. The third box showed our own faces, a little washed out by the overhead light. Daniel greeted us with a smile that looked carefully arranged. He said it was good to see us. He said we looked well. His tone was almost too even, as if he had rehearsed this in his head. I answered simply that we were managing and that the air here suited us. Anna added that the clinic was kind. Julia tilted her head in that way she had when she wanted to appear sympathetic. She said they had been worried and that it had been hard on Lena not knowing when she would see us again. Lena waved and said hello. Her voice pulled at something deep inside me, but I kept my face steady. Victor took control of the conversation before Daniel could move into whatever speech he had prepared. He thanked everyone for joining and explained that the purpose of the call was to clarify the structure of our affairs and to make sure there were no misunderstandings about decisions already made. He spoke slowly, in clear terms, but his tone left no doubt that this was not a brainstorming session. This was a presentation of facts. Daniel tried to interrupt by saying he had his own questions, that he had spoken to an advisor too, that he wanted to propose a plan. Victor raised a hand slightly and said there would be time for questions after he had gone through the information. He said it was important to start from the beginning. That phrase made me think of the hospital again. The beginning, in this context, was not my stroke. It was what happened around that bed. Victor said that before discussing finances, he needed to address something about my mental state at the time I was hospitalized. He explained that he had obtained written statements from Dr. Hayes and from a nurse, stating that I had regained clear consciousness earlier than the family might have realized. He said the documents confirmed that the medical team considered me mentally competent to make my own decisions at the time important events took place. Daniel shifted in his chair. He said he had never been told any of this. Victor replied that he was being told now, and that the record spoke for itself. Then Victor said there was another piece of information that mattered. He said that during my coma, I had been able to hear conversations in my room. He summarized in neutral words what I had heard my son say, that I was a financial burden, that when I died, my wife would be placed in a nursing home, that the house would be sold to fund this and simplify their lives. He did not raise his voice. He did not pour emotion into the description. He simply relayed the content. The silence on the call after that was heavy and sharp. Julia's lips parted as if she wanted to deny something, then closed again. Daniel looked down for a moment, then back up at the camera. He said that people say things under stress that they do not fully mean, that the situation had been extreme, that he had been trying to plan for the worst. He said he had never intended to hurt anyone. I listened, then told him, in a calm voice, that I believed he had been under stress. I also told him that stress can reveal what people really think, not just what they say in public. I said that I had lain there unable to move and listened to my son talk about my wife as if she were a package to store after I was gone. I said that once I understood that, I knew I could not leave our future in his hands. He started to protest, saying I was twisting his words, that he had only wanted to protect us. I did not argue. I simply said that his idea of protection and my idea of respect were different things. Victor stepped in again. He said that while feelings and memories were painful, the important part of this call was to state the current legal reality. He leaned slightly closer to his camera, and I could see the reflection of his screen in his glasses. He explained that after the hospital and our departure, I had consulted him thoroughly. Based on those consultations and on my medical confirmation of mental competence, we had taken a series of steps regarding our assets, care, and future. He began with the house. He said it had been sold legally and properly, with the full consent of both owners. He said the proceeds of that sale no longer existed as a separate house asset that anyone could steer. Instead, they were part of a protected structure under our control. Daniel blinked, then asked directly where the money was, how much there was, what kind of structure Victor meant. Victor answered that the exact figures were not the point of this call. The point was who controlled them. He said that all of my pension and savings and the funds from the house now sat in accounts that could be used only according to instructions I had already given. He said that while I lived, and while Anna lived, those instructions were simple. The money was for our care and our needs, determined by us and by no one else. He added that no bank, no court, no advisor could grant Daniel authority over those resources while these instructions stood and while we were alive. He said the documents had been filed in more than one jurisdiction to make any attempt at interference extremely difficult. Julia could no longer stay silent. She said this was extreme, that they had never tried to steal from us, that all they wanted was transparency. She said this kind of structure made it look like we thought they were criminals. Victor replied that he did not deal in emotions. He dealt in risk and law. He said that the pattern of language I had reported, combined with the pressure Daniel had been applying about power of attorney, presented a real risk to our independence. The structure was built to remove that risk. It was not an accusation, it was a boundary. Then he moved to the part that mattered to me most. He explained that within this structure, there was a separate provision for Lena. He said there was a fund designated specifically for her education and starting life. He explained that this fund would not flow into Daniel and Julia's personal accounts. Instead, when the time came, it would pay directly to institutions or purposes that matched very clear conditions, such as tuition fees or a down payment on a modest home in her own name. He said that, in this way, my granddaughter would receive support from us even if the relationship with her parents remained strained. For a moment, no one spoke. Lena looked from one adult to another, not understanding all the terms, but understanding enough to know this involved her. She asked in a small voice if that meant we did not love her father anymore. The question cut deeper than anything else said on that call. Anna covered her mouth with her hand. I made myself answer. I told Lena that love and trust are not always the same thing. I said that we loved her, and that this was proof of that love. I said that adults sometimes make mistakes so big that trust has to be rebuilt from nothing. I did not say whether that would happen here. I only said that what we had set up made sure she would not be punished for choices she did not make. Daniel's face tightened when I said that. He looked offended, as if he could not see any difference between his own efforts and ours. He said we were overreacting. He said everyone talked about nursing homes and finances in hard times. He said he had simply been preparing for the worst. He insisted that he would never have put Anna anywhere bad. I answered that the problem was not only the word nursing home. It was how he had spoken about us, as costs, as obstacles, as things to move. I said that words like that, spoken around people who cannot speak back, matter. They shape decisions. They show how someone will act when given full control. Victor then addressed the remaining point. He said that there was no power of attorney in Daniel's favor. None. He said that if we ever became unable to act for ourselves, a different person, someone outside the family with a legal duty to follow our written instructions, would step into that role. He named that person, a colleague of his, and stated clearly that Daniel had no authority to override her. He added that there was a small, fixed gift set aside for Daniel after our deaths, an amount we had chosen. He emphasized that it was not open-ended. It could not grow through court arguments, and it could not be used as leverage over our care while we were alive. Daniel stared at the screen, his lips pressed tight together. He asked if there was any room to adjust this, to negotiate. He said this made him look like some kind of villain when all he had done was try to behave like a responsible son. Victor said that from a legal point of view, there was nothing to adjust. The papers were signed, the registrations were complete. Unless Anna and I chose to change them, they would stand exactly as they were. He then turned to me and asked if I wanted to add anything. I thought about shouting, I thought about listing every sacrifice, every long night with bills and broken appliances and school trips we barely afforded. Instead, I kept my voice steady. I told Daniel that this was not revenge. I said revenge would have been leaving him with debts and chaos, or cutting him out completely, or making a public show of everything we had heard and felt. I said this was something else. It was a decision to live the rest of our lives without fearing that our own son would move us like pieces on a board for his convenience. I told him that what hurt the most was not the talk of money. It was hearing my wife reduced to a problem to solve once I was gone. He tried to respond, but his words tangled. He said he had done so much during my coma. He said he had juggled work and hospital visits and Lena's needs. He said he had felt alone. I believed some of that. I did not discount it. I told him I understood that he had felt pressure. Then I said that the difference between us was simple. When I had faced pressure, I had still seen him as my son. When he had faced pressure, he had seen me as a cost. Silence settled again. Julia looked at him, then at us, then away. Lena had started to cry quietly, confused and overwhelmed. Anna finally spoke, her voice thin but firm. She said she had listened to everything and that she stood with me completely. She said she had loved Daniel since the day she first held him, but that she could not place her future in the hands of someone who thought she would be better off in a facility once her husband was out of the way. She said that if he ever wanted to speak to her as a person, not as a task, she would listen, but she would not sign away the rest of her life to his idea of efficiency. After that, there was not much left to say. Victor summarized once more for the record. He said that the purpose of this call had been to inform, not to seek permission. He repeated that our arrangements were final and that any future contact between us would be personal, not legal or financial. He told Daniel and Julia that if they had technical questions, they could send them to his office, but that the main choices would not change. Daniel opened his mouth as if to argue further, then looked at my face on the screen and stopped. He asked one last question. He wanted to know if we would ever come back. I told him honestly that I did not know. I said that some bridges, once burned, cannot be rebuilt, and others can, but only with time and real change. I said that for now, the distance was not only physical, it was the only way we could breathe. He looked like he wanted to say more, but he did not. Julia closed her eyes for a moment, and then told Lena it was time to say goodbye. Lena waved again, her cheeks wet. She asked when she would see us. Anna told her that we loved her, and that she should study hard, be kind, and remember that there was something waiting to help her when she grew older, no matter what happened between the adults. Victor ended the formal part of the meeting. He thanked everyone and said he would disconnect his side once we left the call. The screen showed all 3 boxes for a few seconds longer. Daniel's dining room looked bright and cold. Victor's office looked orderly. Our little room looked small but solid. I moved the cursor to the end call button and paused. Anna placed her hand over mine and pressed down. The call window vanished, leaving only our reflection in the dark screen. The room fell silent except for the distant sound of a car passing outside and the slow ticking of a clock in the hallway.